All right, let's talk about special diets. The reason why I'm putting these in here is because I myself have played with some of them. I went paleo, and then after that, I couldn't add back any of the things I'd given up. Dairy, oddly enough, made me feel like I had gone behind the bar and drank everything that was in sight within about 20 minutes. I felt like I was going to hurl. The room was spinning. I was laying on the couch, I remember, with like one foot on the floor, kind of doing the I really had too much to drink thing, even though all I had was dairy. Bread, I've had a 3-day hangover from eating bread, where you just wake up with a headache every day and joint pain and all these other things. And so when I couldn't add back the things that you typically give up in paleo, and the crunchiness that I had and the stiffness still wasn't quite where I wanted it to be, the not being able to add things back was really sort of the red flag moment for me of, well, my great grandmother had rheumatoid and my joints had been hurting a while. Maybe this isn't from being a massage therapist for 10 years. Maybe this is autoimmune. And so that got me into autoimmune paleo. And so I did that for quite a while. I say I did it strict for like a month, and then I added back the things that I thought were okay. Even then I was still eating better than I feel like most people eat. I wasn't perfect, but I knew like whatever I would have, if I was going to have something that wasn't on my normal plan, I knew how it would make me feel. So it was always a choice. And so like one day I went skiing, and I love to ski, and I don't get to go very often. My husband works a lot. My son, he's a skier now, but he doesn't ski where I ski. And so it was like an epic snow day. And so I went up there and I skied my little legs off. And after that, I had I think it was an autoimmune flare for like the next week. Like I just wanted to lay around, like I was achy and tired, and I just did not feel myself. And so it kind of sent up this red flag. Like if I'm eating well, I should be able to go ski for a day, and not have it knock me on my butt for the next week, right? Like that in my mind was not normal. Like if I'm doing this autoimmune paleo-ish, which is supposedly designed to eliminate things from the diet that have the potential to cross the gut barrier. So a lot of autoimmune issues are preceded by a leaky gut, which a lot of us have. And so I really kind of started to think about it. I was like, there's got to be something else, like something, and so I started poking around, and I came across Dr. Gundry, who wrote The Plant Paradox, and he's all about lectins. And what he was saying made sense, because it's a lot of the same stuff that's in autoimmune paleo. You stay away from foods with lectins, which is not just grains and beans, it's nuts, seeds, seed spices, coffee, chocolate, all the good stuff. Because, if you think about it, a seed's job is to make it through your digestive tract undigested, unaffected, so that when you pass it, it gets planted in this, happy little heap of compost. And so I just sort of made me start thinking, like, because he mentions, things like cucumbers and zucchini and, things that we typically think like, oh, like that's healthy. Well, what if, the seeds that are inside those things going through your digestive tract are really kind of still roughing up the surface? And then I started thinking, I started following these carnivore doctors and talking about dietary fiber, and like the study that shows that like if you have chronic constipation, adding more fiber actually makes it worse because you're adding more volume to the total load. And so I just sort of think about it, and I was like, okay, if the inside of my intestine I already know is aggravated, if I'm sitting through fiber, which basically like roughs up the inside, like, doesn't that make sense that maybe that's not working well for me? And so that's when I kind of got into this carnivore thing. And I thought, you know, like, I know it's crazy. It goes completely against everything we have ever been told. You know, other than the handful of doctors that I follow online, you're going to be hard pressed to find one who's going to agree with you or tell you that you should do it. And so I thought, you know, like, I'll do it for a week. Like, what's the worst that can happen in a week, right? And it was interesting because I got 3 days in and my abdomen felt so insanely relaxed. Like, it had never felt like that before in my life. And it was just one of these things. I was just laying in bed at night and I was like, wow, like, I didn't know that was possible. And so then I went on, I, you know, tried it for a week. And before this, after my little skiing episode, it was probably a good 9 months that I couldn't eat eggs. If I ate eggs, I would have like severe hand and foot pain, both sides, and that would last for 3 days, which most joint pain for me is usually like a little bit like the next day and then it goes away. So for me, like 3 days, like I remember I couldn't bend this pinky. Um, you know, it's one of those things where you're like in the bathroom and you're like, okay, like, who am I going to hire to wipe my bum when I get old? You know, and I'm like, that's not an option for me. Like, I want to be able to wipe my own bum, right? And so I kept, you know, just researching and, you know, trying to figure this stuff out. Well, anyways, after that week of carnivore, I went back to eating eggs again without joint pain. And I know it sounds crazy, and I know you're going to say, whatever, like, Jen, you're nuts. I hear you, but I'm telling you, that's what happened. And so that's why I'm very much like, figure out what's going to work for you. Like, there are the Michaela Petersons of the world who was diagnosed with rheumatoid at the age of 7. And she didn't finally find relief until she went carnivore. But then, like last year at the Ancestral Health Symposium, they presented research with Autoimmune Paleo for people with Hashimoto's, showing that, you know, it improved their thyroid levels. You know, and then there's like Dr. Terry Walls, who is just an amazing story. If you don't know her story, she's an MD with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. She was in a tilt recline wheelchair and she was afraid of losing her clinical privileges. And so she started researching and researching. You know, she'd been to all the best hospitals, had all the best treatments, and still she kept getting worse. And so it just dawned on her. She said, well, why don't I try and find these nutrients? And she said, I had to go online and find them because they didn't teach me that in medical school. And so initially she took supplements to try and like fill in those gaps. And she got a little bit better. But she says it wasn't until I went looking for those things in food that I finally turned it around. And she went from a tilt recline wheelchair to a mountain bike by largely just changing her diet. And so, like, if there's not an epic story of the power of food greater than hers, I don't know what is. Hers, you know, like, she has like a ketogenic version. I know she allows for nightshades. Autoimmune Paleo doesn't allow for nightshades. And that's why I put together the planner, the PDF that you guys have access to. If we get enough people who want to order it collectively, I know the more I order in bulk, the cheaper the price will be. So that's always an option for us as the group gets bigger. And so that's kind of why I put it together. You know, like, you do paleo, you know, and you're better, but there's still something not quite right, you know. And some of the things to look out for is, like, say you're eating something and your nose starts to run. Like, that's a sign that something, you know, isn't quite right. You know, if you eat something and it gives you diarrhea or constipation, you know, if you eat something and you really get bloated and gassy, like, all these things that we sort of take as like, oh, like, that's normal. Like, in my world, it's like, no, that's not really normal. Like, that shouldn't really happen, you know. And so that's why I put this journal together, is so you can start writing down sort of like what you eat, you know, and tracking how you feel. And, you know, keep in mind that sometimes it may take a day or two for symptoms to show up. And so that's where the more data you have, the more you can kind of look back and say, you know, I wonder if it was this thing. And then also in the back of the book, I have lists of some common things, you know, like lists of foods that have lots of lectins and things with oxalates and nightshades. And then like the various FODMAPs, you know, these are some of the big things that I see regularly come up for people that they have issues with. And so I kind of put that together to try and help you sort of pinpoint what maybe your issue is, or maybe like foods like in a certain group, you know, maybe your issue. I know for me, like nightshades, I've guaranteed joint pain. Oxalates, you know, like chocolate, for example, I'll get joint pain, or I'll get headaches, or I'll just get almost like pass out, chronic fatigue, like sleepy, like right away within about 30 minutes. Like I'll just find myself asleep, which, you know, when your husband works all the time and you're at home with a 9-year-old, you know, like just falling asleep during the day, like just doesn't really happen. I mean, the kid hasn't taken a nap in forever. So it's sort of figuring these things out. So like, as you're going forward, you can know how these things are going to affect you. And to me, that's the greatest power, is knowing like, oh, if I eat that, this is how I'm going to feel tomorrow or the day after or whatever. And sometimes you're going to be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. And then other times you're going to be like, you know, that makes me feel so insanely, horribly bad. Like there's no way. Like it's not worth it. You know, I mean, you know, like a little too much information. Like for me, like peanut butter. I mean, like peanut butter is good. It's not really paleo. I mean, Mark Sisson wrote an article like kind of, yeah, it is. Maybe it's not. Either way, I'm still on team. Like, how does it sit with you? And I know for me, like if I have too much, just really beans of any kind, my abdomen just swells up with gas. And my husband's like, oh, well, like, you know, just fart already. And I'm like, but it's not on the launching pad. Like it's not there. So basically I'm just miserable for hours with just like this, you know, swollen abdomen, if you will. And it's just not comfortable, you know? And so, and it's like, they're beans. Like beans don't taste that good, you know, to want to go through all that. So, you know, I may have like a little bit of peanut butter, but I don't, not a ton, you know, like once upon a time. And it's just figuring those things out for yourself, you know. So like if you're going to go, you know, more low carb, keto, carnivore, I recommend like being serious about like the keto quiz that's in the course, because that'll kind of tell you, like your score will tell you if your body's ready for that. If you're close, you can maybe like play with it a little bit. I know in the journal I didn't write down a place for carbohydrate intake, because I don't want people to kind of get obsessed with it when they first get started, you know, because it really is tied to weight loss. And I know people tend to think more is better, but not always necessarily. And so like the key things I put in there were like your protein. Like protein is like your must hit goal. Fat, you can kind of adjust, you know, depending on how much body fat you have to burn, you know, what your hunger level is. And then carbs, you know, are really, it really depends on like your day. You know, if you had like a really heavy workout with a high heart rate, you know, you may need to add some extra carbs that day. You know, I mean, I know for me, like, you know, around lady times, like I have like a day or two where, you know, all I want to eat are carbs. And you know what? I just go with it. Because you know what? It happens every month. And I figure, you know, my body must want it for whatever reason. And so those couple days, like I just go with it. I mean, am I eating, you know, tons and tons of like, you know, stuff? No. You know, like I'll just have more like root vegetables, or, you know, maybe I will have some chocolate, even though it's going to make my joints hurt. I'm a big believer in like listening to your body and what it's telling you. But at the same time, you have to recognize when your body is giving you a signal just because, you know, your hormones are off, you know, like your brain is leptin resistant, you know, because you've eaten high carb for so long, or, you know, your body's still looking for glucose, you know, things like that. You kind of have to be aware of. Like, I know I'm pretty well fat adapted. You know, I can have, you know, carbs for a couple days and then go right back to my, you know, keto, low carb, borderline carnivore way of eating. So it doesn't like play out like day after day after day. And so that's sort of the stuff you got to be mindful of. Other than that, you know, like if you have questions, I mean, ask them in the group. Like, this is a really big subject that I couldn't really put it in one masterclass, but I wanted to get you guys started, you know, just thinking about these things and, you know, realizing if you've gone paleo and it kind of got you part of the way, but you're not really getting, you know, what you want, there may be a next level for you. And that's okay. You know, there's a lot of people who are figuring these things out. So anyways, I'm here to help you guys. Please let me know, ask your questions, you know, drop me an email, whatever. So, all right, I'll text you guys later.